Imagine that one day you find yourself in the world of 1912, an era when ocean liners became a symbol of human progress and the Atlantic became the main route between the old and new worlds. Steam, steel, and the ambitions of large companies created giants of the sea. Newspapers wrote about technical marvels, engineers argued about speed records, and passengers dreamed of crossing the ocean in luxury never before seen on any ship. And among all these ships, there is one that everyone is talking about, the RMS Titanic, the largest liner in the world, the most luxurious, and, as the newspapers assure us, almost unsinkable. April 10th, 1912, the port of Southampton. The morning is cool but clear. You climb the gangway aboard the huge ship. Four giant funnels, painted black and ochre, tower above you. The decks stretch for hundreds of meters, and journalists, dock workers, and relatives of passengers crowd the pier. The noise of voices mixes with the cries of seagulls and the hum of steam engines. You are Captain Edward John Smith, the most experienced captain of the White Star Line. You have decades of service and thousands of miles of ocean behind you. Many consider you a man who can be trusted with any ship. This is to be your last voyage before retirement. You walk slowly and confidently across the deck. The sailors take off their caps to greet you. The officers are already waiting for your orders. "Good morning, Captain," says First Officer William Murdoch. You nod and glance at the pier. Hundreds of people are boarding the ship. Among them are millionaires, immigrants, engineers, families with children. More than 2,200 people have entrusted their fate to this ship. The Titanic impresses even you, a man who has seen many ships. The main staircase is finished with carved oak. Chandeliers sparkle with electric light, and the carpets are soft like in the best hotels in London. The restaurants are preparing to serve French cuisine, and on the promenade decks, passengers are already taking pictures of the giant ship. But behind the luxury lies another side, the machinery. Down below, deep in the hull, 29 boilers and hundreds of stokers are working to keep the fire going so that the huge propellers can turn. The engines are capable of propelling the liner to 23 knots, an impressive speed for such a giant. You walk onto the bridge. From here, you can see the entire port. The tugs begin to prepare to pull the ship out. The ropes are stretched tight as strings. The officers check their watches. "Everything is ready to depart, sir," reports Senior Officer Henry Wilde. You take out your pocket watch. It is 11:40 a.m. This is a moment that will go down in history. "Cast off," you say calmly. The order is relayed across the decks. The ropes fall into the water. The tugs begin to slowly pull the giant liner away from the pier. The crowd on shore waves hats and handkerchiefs. The orchestra plays. The passengers applaud. But almost immediately there is a moment of alarm. When the Titanic begins to move, its enormous propellers create a powerful current. The New York, standing nearby, begins to shift sharply from its place. Its ropes break one after another. The ship slowly turns, directly toward the Titanic. Tension mounts on the bridge. "The distance is closing, sir," shouts an officer. You instantly give orders to the tugs and engines. The huge ships slowly draw closer, tens of meters, 20, 15, and only at the last moment do the tugs manage to hold back the New York. The collision is avoided. Sighs of relief are heard on the deck. You look at the receding port and say quietly, "It seems that the Atlantic has decided to test us right away. But there are still 4 days to go, and the ocean has much more serious trials in store." Southampton gradually disappears behind the stern, and all that remains before you is the Atlantic Ocean, cold, vast, and almost endless. You stand on the captain's bridge and watch as the Titanic slowly enters open waters. This ship is the pinnacle of engineering of its time. It is almost 269 meters long, as tall as an 11-story building, and has a displacement of over 46,000 tons. But for you, it is not just a marvel of technology. It is a responsibility. Keep course for Cherbourg, you order. The first day passes calmly. The Titanic is heading for the French port of Cherbourg, where new passengers are to board. Among them are the richest people in Europe and America: John Jacob Astor, Benjamin Guggenheim, Margaret Brown. Each of them is accustomed to luxury, and the Titanic provides it. While the passengers dine in restaurants and stroll on the decks, you walk around the ship. It is your habit to personally check everything before a long voyage. You go down to the bridge. "How's the course?" you ask. "Everything's stable, Captain," replies the helmsman. Then you go down below, where most passengers never go, to the engine room. It is hot and noisy here. Huge pistons move up and down, and stokers throw coal into the furnaces. Sweat drips down their faces. "How's the pressure?" you ask Chief Engineer Joseph Bell. "Excellent, sir. The engines are running perfectly." You nod. That's exactly what you expected. Late in the evening, the Titanic arrives in Cherbourg. Passengers are brought to the ship in small tenders because the port is too shallow for such a giant. The lights of the French coast are reflected in the water. Music plays from the salons. But there is no time to linger. A few hours later, the ship sets sail again, heading for Queenstown, now Cove, in Ireland, the last stop before the Atlantic. April 11th. You are standing on the bridge as the Titanic slowly approaches the Irish coast. Most of the people boarding here are emigrants, people who are leaving to seek a new life in America. Many of them have never seen a ship like this before. They look at it with wonder and hope. By noon, boarding is complete. There are now more than 2,200 people on board, passengers and crew. You give the order. Full speed ahead to New York. The ship begins its actual crossing of the Atlantic. The next 2 days pass quietly. The weather is clear, the sea is almost calm. Passengers enjoy the journey. In first class, there are dinners and concerts. In second class, families play chess and stroll on the decks. In third class, there is music and Irish dancing. But you, Captain, know that the ocean rarely stays calm for long. On April 14th, radiograms begin to arrive from other ships. They all report the same thing: ice. Ice floes and icebergs have been spotted on the route. The radio operator brings you another message. "From the steamer Baltic, Captain." You read it carefully. The message warns of fields of drifting ice. You pass the note to the officers and order them to stay south. It's a normal precaution. But the Titanic continues to travel at a speed of about 22 knots. In the evening, you go out on the bridge again. The sky is clear. The wind is almost absent. The sea is too calm. It's beautiful. But for observers at the bow, this means one problem. The waves don't break against the icebergs, and it becomes more difficult to spot them. You look at the dark horizon. The ocean seems completely empty. But somewhere ahead, in the cold darkness, a giant chunk of ice as tall as a house is drifting, and in a few hours the fate of the ship will be decided. The evening of April 14th, 1912, dawns calmly. Too calmly. You stand on the captain's bridge and look out at the ocean. The wind has almost completely died down, and the sea is as smooth as glass. Above your head is a clear sky studded with stars. The temperature is gradually dropping, and the air is getting colder. For the passengers, it is a wonderful evening. An orchestra is playing in the first-class salons. Ladies in evening gowns ascend the famous grand staircase, while gentlemen discuss the news and politics. On the promenade decks, people gaze at the stars and talk about how amazing this new ship is. But on the bridge, things are different. You have already received several radio messages about ice. The steamships Coronia, Baltic, Californian, and Mesaba have all sent warnings about ice flows and icebergs on the route. The radio operators have passed some of these messages on to you. Some they haven't because they were busy sending passenger telegrams to America. This was common practice at the time. Nevertheless, you know that the area ahead may be dangerous. At around 9:20 p.m., you talk to Second Officer Charles Lightoller. Increase surveillance, you say. If it gets colder or foggy, report immediately. Aye, Captain. Two lookouts, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, are standing at the bow of the ship. Their job is to be the first to spot ice. But there is one problem. The binoculars for the observers were never found. They remained locked in a cabinet, the key to which was accidentally taken away by an officer who was transferred from the ship just before the voyage. Therefore, the sailors can only observe with the naked eye. At around 10 p.m., you leave the bridge and go to your cabin. Before doing so, you say to First Officer Murdoch, "If you have the slightest doubt, call me immediately." The night is getting colder. The temperature drops to almost zero. At the bow of the ship, sailor Frederick Fleet looks intently ahead. The ocean is black and silent. No waves, no moonlight. These are the conditions that sailors would later call the most dangerous for icebergs. At 11:40 p.m., something happens that will change everything. Frederick Fleet suddenly notices a dark shadow ahead. At first, it seems to be part of the horizon, but then he realizes it's an iceberg. He grabs the signal bell and rings it 3 times. Ding, ding, ding. Then he grabs the phone. "Iceberg dead ahead," he shouts to the bridge. First Officer William Murdoch reacts instantly. "Hard to starboard. Full speed astern." The engine crew tries to slow the ship down. The Titanic begins to turn. The huge hull slowly veers to the side. For a few seconds, it seems that the collision will be avoided, but the ship is too big and too fast. The starboard side passes along the iceberg. At first, it is almost imperceptible. The passengers feel only a slight vibration, as if the ship had driven over gravel. But underwater, something else is happening. The ice tears the hull in several places. The metal bends and cracks open in 6 watertight compartments, and the ship was only designed for 4 flooded compartments. A few minutes later, you are awakened. "Captain, come to the bridge immediately." You quickly put on your uniform and go out on deck. "What happened?" Murdoch replies briefly, "We hit an iceberg." You look ahead. A giant iceberg slowly disappears into the darkness behind the stern. But now there is only one important question. How serious is the damage? You go downstairs with Chief Engineer Thomas Andrews, the man who helped design the Titanic. Water is already beginning to fill the first compartments. Andrews silently inspects the damage. Several minutes pass. Finally, he looks up at you. His face is pale. "Captain," he says quietly, "the ship is doomed. The Titanic will not last more than 2 hours, and there are more than 2,000 people on board. There are only enough lifeboats for about half of them. The passengers on deck are still unaware of what is happening. The music is still playing. But you already understand. The hardest night of your life is beginning." You are standing in a flooded compartment next to the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews. Cold water is already rushing at your feet, breaking through the damaged bulkheads. The metal creaks. The pumps are working at full capacity, but it's clear that it's not enough. Andrews looks at the ship's blueprint once more and slowly shakes his head. The first 5 compartments are already taking on water, and the 6th is damaged too. The bulkheads aren't high enough to stop it. The water will keep coming in. You get what he's saying. Even though the Titanic is considered the safest ship of its time, you can't change the laws of physics. "How much time do we have?" you ask. "An hour, maybe an hour and a half. 2 at most, I. These words sound like a death sentence. You climb back up to the bridge. The night remains as quiet and clear as if nothing had happened. But now you know, the ship is slowly dying. Wake up the radio operators, you order. Have them send a distress signal. In the radio room, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride begin transmitting messages. First, the old signal, CQD, ship in distress. Then the new signal, which has recently been introduced, SOS. CQD, CQD, SOS. This is the Titanic. We have struck an iceberg. We need immediate assistance. The signal goes out into the night, into the cold ocean. Some ships respond. Among them is the Carpathia, about 58 miles away. Its captain, Arthur Rostron, immediately changes course and goes full speed ahead. But even at maximum speed, it will take more than 3 hours to reach the Titanic. The Titanic will not last that long. You give the following order. Prepare the lifeboats. There are 20 of them on board. They can hold about 1,178 people. But there are more than 2,200 people on the ship. The officers begin to wake the passengers. Put on your life jackets and come up on deck. At first, many people don't understand the seriousness of the situation. Some even laugh. It's just a precaution, right? The ship seems too big to sink, but the cold is already setting in, and the bow of the ship is beginning to dip slightly. Thomas Andrews goes from cabin to cabin, urging people to go up on deck. Please put on your life jackets and come out on deck. It's important. On the upper deck, officers are preparing the lifeboats. You give the main order. Women and children first. The first lifeboat, number 7, is ready to be lowered. But something unexpected happens. People are in no hurry to get in. Many do not believe that the ship could sink and do not want to leave the warm and well-lit liner for a small boat in the middle of the icy ocean. As a result, the first boat leaves incomplete, with about 28 people, although it could have taken 65. You watch this from the bridge. Each empty boat means lost lives. Meanwhile, the ship's tilt becomes slightly more noticeable. Musicians on deck begin to play to calm the passengers. The orchestra, led by Wallace Hartley, performs calm melodies. Signal flares soar into the night sky, one after another. White flashes illuminate the ocean. Somewhere in the distance there may be a ship, but no one knows for sure if it can see these signals. You look at your watch again. Only 40 minutes have passed since the collision, but the water continues to rise inside the hull, and the hardest part of the night is yet to come. People begin to understand the truth. The Titanic is indeed sinking. A little over an hour has passed since the collision. Now it is impossible to hide the truth. The bow of the Titanic is visibly sinking, and the cold waters of the Atlantic are slowly flooding more and more compartments of the ship. The people on deck begin to realize that this is not a drill. This is a fight for their lives. You stand on the bridge and watch as one lifeboat after another is prepared. The officers try to maintain order. Women and children first, they repeat loudly. But now the situation is becoming more complicated. Some passengers begin to panic. Men try to break through to the boats with their families. Others, on the contrary, still do not believe that the ship can sink and hesitate. Meanwhile, time is running out. Lifeboat after lifeboat is lowered into the water. Boat number 6, number 5, number 3, number 1. But many of them leave half empty. People are afraid to leave the huge, well-lit liner for a small boat in the dark ocean. You understand. Historians will argue about this later. But now every minute is precious. On the stern deck, the musicians continue to play. They perform waltzes and popular tunes of the time. The music helps keep people from panicking. Designer Thomas Andrews continues to walk the decks. He has already taken off his life jacket. He knows that time is running out. Put on your life jackets. Hurry to the lifeboats, he repeats over and over. By this point, the water has already reached the forward stairways and is beginning to rise on the lower decks. The stokers and mechanics below continue to work, maintaining electricity and pumps. Thanks to them, the lights on the ship are still on. This allows the evacuation to continue. But for many third-class passengers, the way to the upper decks is longer and more difficult. The corridors are confusing, and some doors are closed. Stewards try to direct people upstairs. On the upper deck, officers load their revolvers to maintain order. The lifeboats are now filling up faster. At 0:45, signal flares are launched. One after another, they light up the night sky. Some people notice the lights of a distant ship on the horizon. It is probably the SS Californian. It is relatively close, but its radio operator is already asleep, and no one receives the distress signal. Meanwhile, the ship begins to tilt more and more. You look at your watch. It is 1:20 a.m. Most of the lifeboats have already been lowered. Hundreds of people are still on board. The deck is gradually becoming sloped. People begin to hold on to the railings to keep from slipping. The cold intensifies. The water temperature is around -2 degrees Celsius. You know that a person can only survive in such water for a few minutes. The last lifeboats are being prepared for launch. Some men begin to realize that there are almost no places left for them. Some say goodbye to their wives. Some help strangers get into the boats. Some just stare silently at the ocean. The music is still playing, and the final phase of the disaster lies ahead. The ship that was called Unsinkable can no longer save itself, and soon the moment will come when the Titanic disappears under the water. The night is getting colder. You stand on the bridge and feel the ship slowly tilting forward beneath you. Now everyone can see it. The bow of the Titanic is sinking deeper and deeper into the water, while the stern begins to rise gradually. The panic is no longer hidden. People realize that there is almost no time left. The last lifeboats, collapsible boats A and B, are being prepared on the deck. They are stored on the roof of the officers' cabins, and attempts are being made to free them as quickly as possible. But the water is already reaching the front of the boat deck. You look around. The officers continue to help people. Some of them already understand that they themselves will not be saved. First Officer Murdoch organizes boarding the last boats. Second Officer Lightoller helps women and children climb over the sides. Shouts, commands, and cries can be heard on the deck. But amid all this, the orchestra continues to play. The musicians stand on the deck in life jackets and play melodies to keep people from panicking. Many witnesses would later recall that the last song may have been "Nearer, My God, to Thee," although historians still argue about whether this was the case. 1:40 a.m. Most of the lifeboats have already left. Small lights float in the ocean around the ship, the lanterns of the boats. People sit in them, looking at the huge liner, still brightly lit by electric lights. But hundreds of people remain on board. You give your final orders. Everyone save themselves as best they can. Some begin to throw folding boats overboard. One of them falls upside down on the deck. The ship tilts more and more. The water is already reaching the captain's bridge. You take one last look around the deck. People are trying to stay upright on the sloping surface. Some jump into the water, others hold on to the railings. At this point, the electric lights are still on. But the pressure of the water is becoming too strong. At around 2:18 a.m., something happens that many survivors will remember for the rest of their lives. The ship's hull makes a terrible cracking sound. The Titanic breaks in two. The bow is almost completely underwater. It quickly sinks, pulling everything nearby with it. The stern rises high into the air for a few seconds. Hundreds of people find themselves on its deck. Then it, too, begins to sink slowly. The lights on the ship go out. The huge liner, which just a few days ago was considered the pinnacle of human engineering, disappears into the black waters of the Atlantic. 2:20 a.m. The Titanic is completely submerged. The ocean becomes quiet again. But now its surface is filled with hundreds of people who have found themselves in the icy water. And there is one more terrible ordeal ahead on this night: the struggle for survival. At the moment when the stern of the Titanic disappears under the water, the ocean becomes eerily quiet for a few seconds. Then the silence is broken by a sound that many survivors will remember for the rest of their lives: the cries of people. Hundreds of passengers and crew members found themselves in the icy waters of the Atlantic. The temperature was around -2 degrees Celsius. In such water, a person can lose consciousness in just a few minutes. You are no longer on the bridge. The ship is gone. All around you is the black ocean, debris, and the starry sky. People cling to wooden panels, doors, pieces of furniture, and life jackets. Some try to swim to the lifeboats, but the boats are already overcrowded. Some officers are afraid to swim closer. If too many people try to climb into the boat, it could capsize. The cries gradually grow weaker. After 10 to 15 minutes, the icy water does its job. The ocean begins to sink back into silence. Meanwhile, the lifeboats slowly gather together. The people in them sit silently, covering their children and trying to keep warm. In one of the boats, Fifth Officer Harold Lowe decides to return to the scene of the disaster. He gathers several boats together, transfers people, and returns, hoping to rescue someone from the water. But when they return, it is almost silent around them. They manage to find only a few survivors. The rest have disappeared into the cold water. Almost 2 hours pass. The people in the boats shiver from the cold and stare at the horizon. Finally, a light appears. A ship is slowly approaching from the east. It is the RMS Carpathia. Its captain, Arthur Rostron, received the SOS signal and immediately sent the ship at full speed. The crew prepared blankets, hot tea, and medical assistance. At around 4 a.m., the Carpathia begins picking up the first lifeboats. People are hoisted aboard using rope ladders. Many are crying. Some are unable to speak due to the cold and shock. A total of 705 people will be rescued, but more than 1,500 passengers and crew members will perish that night. As the last boat is hoisted aboard, the people on the Carpathia look out at the ocean. Where just a few hours ago the largest ship in the world had been, now there is only empty water and scattered debris. This disaster will shock the entire world. Newspapers will write about it for weeks. Investigations will begin, maritime safety regulations will change, and there will be a requirement to have enough lifeboats for all passengers. But for those who survived that night, all this will have a different meaning, because they will forever remember the moment when the Titanic disappeared into the cold darkness of the Atlantic. The morning of April 15th, 1912. The survivors stand on the deck of the Carpathia and look out at the empty ocean. Where just a few hours ago the largest and most luxurious liner in the world had been, now there is only the cold water of the Atlantic and scattered debris. 705 people were saved, but more than 1,500 people died that night. As the Carpathia sets course for New York, a heavy silence reigns on board. People were wrapped in blankets, many sitting silently, unable to believe what had happened. Some searched for their loved ones among the survivors, asking the same question over and over again. "Have you seen my husband, my sister, my child?" The answer was often the same: silence. Meanwhile, radio stations around the world are already broadcasting the news. The Titanic has sunk. At first, many newspapers don't even believe it. Some publications mistakenly report in the morning that the ship is being towed to port. But the truth becomes known very quickly. The world is shocked. The ship that was called Unsinkable disappeared during its maiden voyage. When the Carpathia arrives in New York on April 18th, 1912, thousands of people greet it at the port. Reporters, photographers, relatives of passengers, everyone is waiting for news. Rain falls on the city as the survivors disembark. For many, a new life begins. But the memory of that night will remain with them forever. Official investigations began, first in the U.S. Senate, then in the British Commission of Inquiry. Witnesses talked about the collision, the lack of lifeboats, the distress signals, and the ship Californian, which was relatively close but did not come to the rescue. This disaster leads to major changes. A few years later, new international safety rules are adopted. Every ship must have enough lifeboats for everyone on board. Radio stations must operate around the clock. The International Ice Service is established in the North Atlantic to monitor icebergs. As for you, Captain Edward John Smith died with his ship. No one knows for sure what happened in the final minutes. Some witnesses said they saw you on the bridge until the very end. Others claimed that you were helping passengers get to the lifeboats. But one thing is certain, you remained on board the Titanic until the very last moment. And this story became one of the most famous tragedies in the history of seafaring. Decades passed. In 1985, explorer Robert Ballard discovered the wreckage of the Titanic at a depth of almost 3,800 meters at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. The ship lies there today as a silent reminder of that night, of how human confidence in its own invincibility collided with the forces of nature, and of how even the greatest creations of man remain vulnerable to the ocean.